Classrooms often fail to teach math effectively due to a focus on rote memorization over conceptual understanding, resulting in over 60% of the U.S. fourth graders and 70% of eighth graders lacking proficiency. Systematic issues include teacher shortage, lack of engagement, and a rigid curricula that fail to support students with learning gaps, learning policies, policy institutes. Over 60% of students are struggling with math, as has been gone over here.
This part really matters. What we see from national data here in the United States is that at grade 4, over 60% of students don't meet a minimum level of math proficiency. By the time we get to grade 8, it's over 70% of students. This is not a special education conversation. This is a conversation about what is happening in general education settings with general education students, the majority of whom struggle with math. And if I'm thinking about students who struggle with math, the strategies that have been very helpful for students that have an identified disability are also really helpful for students that are struggling with math without that formal disability identification. I would say that the science of math is, in many schools, focused on 60, 70, 80% of students. And many times those practices that are helpful for students who struggle with math are actually helpful for all. But it's easy to just say, oh, that's a special education thing, to push it to the side, and then not having any accountability for the majority of students in the United States who are struggling with math. And what are we going to do about those learners who have unfinished learning and who have learning gaps? And we need to address those right now.
I mean, yes, this is I'm starting to view classrooms as a very bad way to learn mathematics. And, how did I come to this conclusion? Well, it was by the way of experience. Can I, to speak to this issue, in my experience, when I look at a classroom and why this may be a terrible idea and terrible way to learn, math, is that the classroom, like in a classroom setting, okay, our classrooms are overstuffed. For instance, there's just too many kids in a math classroom. Everybody's struggling in those courses. You go in there, and what do you find when you're in a math classroom in the United States? What you find is that there's a bunch of other people there that are all, that all want to learn, right? The same thing that you're trying to learn, but they're all in that facility with the same problems, the same gaps in their understanding, the same struggles with understanding it, the same pain that you've got and everything. And you're using the same methods that these people who have left the system with gaps in their understanding have been using for the longest time, which is, to learn this stuff in school, to rely on the classroom settings to teach them. And I mean, it's like we ended up in this situation and boat because we've been doing the same thing for a long time. We've been relying on these institutions to teach us how to do math instead of taking matters into our own hands and using, online platforms like Khan Academy and that sort of thing, and really flexing in that regard the performing better aspect of it. We have these other methods and strategies, and it just strikes me that the classroom setting, this is where you get mediocrity. You get a bunch of people that really suck at math in these classrooms, and they end up all in the same struggles with each other, in those classrooms. And so as a result, the teacher gets swamped, or if it isn't the teacher, technically it's the professor, as a term, is swamped in the colleges as well. And people don't get the support that they need in those classrooms. They try and they try and they try, but it just shuffles them through, from one level to the next and everything, until they hit a wall, and then they have to go in and fill those procedural, or fill those holes that they've been, that have been left in their education or their miseducation by the hands of the system, and you end up with this nightmare that's on our hands right now, where, you've got 70% of kids that are struggling in a system where, they're going to school and they're not getting effective math instruction at all in the schools, which is just it's a nightmare. Like and one of the things that makes Khan Academy's platform a superior way to learn is that you get instant feedback for an equation that you submit to it. If you make an attempt and you do it and everything, you can get instant feedback, and you can even get out a notepad, right, on it and a big red marker, and if you get an answer wrong, record the wrong answer, and then start to research what you did wrong, on your wrong answer, and try to figure out why you got it wrong and work on that, and employ those sorts of strategies, which I think is what I'm going to start doing. I'm going to have to find, go to the store and get a pair of red markers, as well, to do this, to do that kind of thing on my own work and everything. But I'm thinking to myself, if I do this the way that I've been doing it for a long time, or that like everybody else has been doing it for a long time, then I'm going to get the same terrible results in mathematics that everybody else gets, right? Because this is what it's been like for most people. I mean, and it's been the same thing. It's been the same way for 30 years, as far as I can see. Because I remember being down there in mid-Florida, going to Cypress Creek in our, 7 a.m. math courses with, some of the kids falling asleep in class, and, most of them wide awake, though, and they're all asking questions and everything, and everybody's got their hand up, all asking for help, and back then, we didn't have Khan Academy. When I was in high school, we didn't have the online platforms. We didn't have anything like that, as a strategy. And so it's like, this is so just revolutionary in such a big way, because it changes the equation entirely, in that at the very least, if you're in a math class and you're struggling, you can go to Khan Academy and it will help, you navigate your way through the course. I mean, I wish that we had Salman Khan when I was going up through high school, because I wouldn't have had the kinds of problems that I was having in high school. I would have just been completely demolishing my peers and everything in terms of performance, and yet, because I would have known about it and nobody else would have, and I would have just been top A student, because I know exactly where to go to study, and it just strikes me that, like I said, that was a thought that I began having, with 50% of math students at college fail out and crash out in the first term, if you do what most people are doing, if you do what the average person is doing, you're not going to overperform average people. You're going to have to try to tackle the problem a different way to actually overperform them.